Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Titus Maccius Plautus's play Pseudolus. So first off, I want to say Plautus is a really important figure in sort of the history of theater. He really should be considered up there with Thespis because Plautus is, as far as we know, first person to make a living by being a playwright. So before this, playwrights wrote plays, but that wasn't their day job, right? That wasn't what they did. They might be soldiers, they might be politicians, they might be farmers, they might be city officials, whatever it was. Plautus is the first person, as far as we know, who survived by being a playwright. That was his job. And so that's a really, really important development in the professionalization of theater. So, Pseudolus, this is a Roman comedy. The Romans loved comedy, as far as we can tell, based on the plays that have survived and the records that have survived. The Romans certainly had tragedy. They had Greek tragedies that got revived. They had tragedians of their own, people like Seneca, who often reworked Greek material and made it more Roman in particular ways. But then they had a lot of comic playwrights. Comedies seem to, as far as theater goes, comedy seems to have been more to the Roman taste. And so people like Plautus and Terence, who were both comic playwrights, were very, very successful. And Pseudolus is a great example of the Roman taste in comedy. It evolves from what's called New Comedy, Greek New Comedy. It's basically a development that goes from the era of people like Menander, who's played Dyskolos, or the misanthrope, as it's sometimes translated, is the only fully surviving example of New Comedy that we have. So for the Greeks, for people like Menander, New Comedy is much less political than Old Comedy. You think Aristophanes, people like this. So Old Comedy is very political. New Comedy is more apolitical. Under the Romans, comedy gets even less political. There's still social commentary going on, as there always is in theater, in literature, etc., in art, etc., etc., but it's much more general. So even with Greek New Comedy, there is some sense that, like, specific issues within the polis or specific people within the city-state might be being satirized. The Romans largely do away with that. Roman comedy becomes much more generic, almost sitcom-like. And this is true in the sense that you have stock characters like Pseudolus himself, the cunning slave who ends up sort of resolving everything at the end of the play. Simo, he's the miser figure. You have Calidorus, who is the sort of lovelorn male hero. You have Harpax, a soldier and a braggart. These kinds of characters become very stock figures, and they actually get carried through and into the commedia dell'arte, which evolves later out of Roman comedy and gets sort of mixed with folk performance traditions. So Pseudolus is very much in this vein. So the story itself of Pseudolus, there's Calidorus, who is in love with Phoenicium. She is a so in the Greek and Roman world, there's sort of different levels of sex workers. We might call her a courtesan. That might be a good way of putting it. So there's like streetwalker type prostitutes, but then there's more. So Phoenicium is probably a sort of middle ground. Like there are what the Greeks called hetarii. They were sort of upper crust, usually well educated. Phoenicium might be in that vein. Hetarii would often go to symposia and things like this, where people, upper class aristocrats, were having these sort of educated conversations and things like this. And yes, they had sex with their clients, but they were also there to play music, to have philosophical discussions, to recite poetry. They were there for their mind as well as for their body. Then in the Greek term was the pornai. The pornai are the sort of standard streetwalkers, much lower class, much cheaper. You went to them just to have sex without necessarily any sort of interaction beyond that. Phoenicium is probably either a hetaria or somewhere maybe slightly below that. She's definitely kept by a pimp named Balio, who has the right to sell her if he wants to. And he does, in fact, sell her in this play. And that's where the whole conflict really comes in. Trying to find the name of the guy he sells her to really quickly, because he's a Macedonian general, I think. I cut all heads off is the translation here. This is the Lionel Cason translation in the Norton Anthology of Drama. So Balio the pimp has sold Phoenicium, who, by the way, never gets any lines, to I cut all heads off for 2,000 sesterces, I think. But I'm not 100%. Oh, drachmas. 2,000 drachmas. Sesterces. So this play is set in Athens, so that's why they're using drachmas. So, I cut all heads off has sent 1,500 of the drachmas. He has to send 500 more with a particular seal that Balio will recognize, and then Balio will give Phoenicium to Heads Off's messenger. Right? The problem for Calidorus is that he is in love with Phoenicium, but he doesn't have any money. He has been trying to raise the money to buy her from Balio, but he has been unsuccessful. Now, his father, Simo, has plenty of money, but will not give him the money to buy this girl. Pseudolus, who is Simo and Calidorus' chief slave, basically promises that he will, by the end of the day, get Phoenicium for Calidorus, and he will get Simo to give up 2,000 drachmas. How is he going to do this? Pseudolus has no idea. He makes, and this is one of the fascinating things about Pseudolus as a character, about the cunning slave character, is that in this case he makes these big promises with no plan for how he's going to achieve them. But what ends up happening is Harpax, the Snatcher, who is I Cut All Heads Off's slave or servant, somebody, he works for I Cut All Heads Off, so he has brought the 500 drachmas and this letter with the seal. When he shows up, Balio is out, so Pseudolus sort of substitutes himself for the chief slave of Balio, and so Pseudolus gets the 500 drachmas and the letter, and he gets the letter. He doesn't get the drachmas, so he still needs that, but he's got the letter now. He sends Harpax basically out to this inn to have a nap and promises to come get him when Balio gets home. Instead, you get Carinus, who Calidor. So he's Calidorus' friend. Calidorus. Okay, hold on one second. Pseudolus had sent Calidorus, the young lover, out to find somebody who will help with their endeavors and bring 500 drachmas. So Carinus basically comes along and he's like, "Yeah, man, I'll totally get you this money. It's going to be great. We'll figure it all out." And they happen, and Carinus happens to have a slave called Simia, or the monkey. Simia is cunning, he's ruthless, he is unscrupulous, and he is perfect for Pseudolus' scheme. So basically, Pseudolus borrows Carinus' armor, dresses Simia up as a soldier, and gives him the letter, gives him Carinus' 500 drachmas, and he has Simia go to Balio, turn over the letter, turn over the 500 drachmas, get Phoenicium, and take her off to Calidorus. Harpax then shows back up. Balio and Simo are like, "We're going to have some fun with this guy," and they start abusing him, basically like insulting him, and all this stuff. And Harpax is like, "Hey, man, here's the 500 drachmas. You got to give me this girl. I gave the letter to your servant before." And only really at that point does Balio sort of realize what's happened. Pseudolus has tricked him. And Simo and Balio had this bet, basically, where if Pseudolus was able to get Phoenicium away from Balio, then Balio would pay Simo 2,000 drachmas. Pseudolus and Simo also had a bet that basically said the same thing. Or basically, so I think the bet between Simo and Pseudolus was that if Pseudolus could get Simo 2,000 drachmas, then Simo would turn those over to Pseudolus. So everything has worked out perfectly, right? Balio has lost Phoenicium. He has given her up to Calidorus now, and so he has lost his bet to Simo. Simo gets his 2,000 drachmas from Balio, and then Simo, somewhat surprisingly, rather than sort of turning on Pseudolus and saying, "You're my slave, you've been tricky, you're not getting your money," Simo says, "I'm going to surprise Pseudolus by doing the right thing and honoring our agreement," which he does. And so Pseudolus gets this money. He has gotten Phoenicium and Calidorus together, so they're now happy and together for the moment. And the disgusting pimp that was a villain of the play gets his comeuppance. The miserly gentleman gets tricked out of his money, but he's a good sport about it, and so it's a happy ending. right? And this is one of the things with comedy, right? Is you have these sort of stock figures, and there is a little bit of that sort of Saturday Night Live type approach, right? From the sort of the days where you just had a character who they said the same lines over and over, regardless of what the scenario was, and that was the whole skit thing. That there is that sort of element slightly to Roman comedy up through sort of commedia dell'arte and things like this, where you have these stock figures. It's not quite as serious as that, but you have these stock figures. The cunning slave is always going to trick people and sort of rearrange things so that everything falls into place. The miserly gentleman is always going to get tricked out of his money. The young lovers are always going to end up together. And again, there is this element of I think it's from Oscar Wilde's Importance of Being Earnest, the explanation that the good end happily, the bad unhappily. That's what fiction means. Realistically, that's what comedy means, right? The good characters come out well, the bad characters come out poorly, and everybody's happy at the end except Balliol.